own teaching practice now and say what you agree with, what you think's missing. On the issue of feedback, and I think this applies both to Paul and to Sue's lessons, so let's deal with that now. Sue, your final activity. What do the students have to do for that?
They had to describe some instances from their own experience where those idioms might have been used.
Okay. And the aim of that stage is what?
Well, that was the aim of the lesson, to allow them to do that, to recognise those idioms when they hear them and to produce them themselves in the right context.
Okay, yeah. And how would you describe the aim of that particular stage? How did it contrast, for example, from the one where they were just filling in, putting the idioms into gaps?
Well, it was free practice.
And also personalised, they got to talk about themselves. Okay, so during that sort of free, personalised group work, what's the teacher's role?
Do a sweep and then...
You do a sweep, what's that for?
Just to check that they're all sort of writing everything down and, you know, they've started the task and sort of understand it. But then you do a more thorough check, like if they've got specific needs, then you go to them one by one to help them. Is that right?
I think for a freer task, you should monitor from a distance. And then
You do a sweep, have a quick look and make sure everybody's doing it in the way that you'd hope they would, and then you take remedial action if they're not, by saying, right, everybody stop, get it back, set it up again. But teacher steps in and corrects a lot there?
No, delayed correction.
Because it's freer, so your aim is what's those two aspects of language?
Encourage fluency.
Fluency, your focus is fluency, isn't it, right? So we don't deal with error at all?
Yeah, afterwards.
delayed
Delayed error.
Why? Why would we delay it?
Because you would be interrupting fluency if you tried to. And also, if you do it on the board, then the whole group can benefit rather than just picking on somebody who's done one thing wrong.
I think
Okay,
the
so-
way you checked it was brilliant on the OHP, because
Yeah.
I only had time to write one up by the end of it.
But I
you
forgot
could-
to allow the students to say out loud what they'd been discussing in pairs, which was really interesting. And I forgot it because I
Can't
was
get it all.
concentrating so hard
Yeah.
on writing it on the
Corrections.
OHP. And
Okay, that's it. So what stage would you have built in then that you forgot to do?
that they could have talked out loud some of the things that I'd heard them say. I would have encouraged them to do that. And also I asked them to think if they had these sort of phrases in their own language, and I mean, Celine told me that they do say hit the roof, it's the same word and it's the same meaning, and she told me what it sounds like, and I completely forgot to give her the opportunity to say that in front of
Right.
the
Okay, so I think you're spot on there. Feedback on that sort of group freer practice needs to come in two slots, really, in two stages. First of all, just on the content of what they've been saying. They've been saying lots of interesting stuff to each other. They've been talking about when they hit the roof, or who they think the world of, or whatever the language was, and lots of interesting personal things were coming out. It's important then, I think, just to recognise that and to give them a chance to swap some of that information with the whole of the class, and everybody gets to hear a bit of the content on that. You're recognising the importance of content as well. If you do that, then you can go on to a correction slot. If you miss out that content thing, it sends the message that it's all about accuracy, and they go straight from talking to their partner to, right, I noticed a few errors here. And that, that's not what we want to, the message we want to send. So feedback on content first. What have you said? What did your partner say to you? What did you find interesting that your partner said to you? A bit of that, and then a correction slot. Yeah. And that correction slot should look at what?
accuracy.
Of
Target language.
yeah. So yeah, it's not always easy to pick out things as you're monitoring like that, really. But any correction slot should feature first and foremost indirect questions for yours and your idioms. Right, back to Paul. All right. Any other feedback for Paul?
You didn't check the words direct and indirect, and a few of the students didn't actually seem to know what a direct or indirect.
I thought having the examples up there, and I said the direct version of the question is, the indirect version is.
You gave a handout.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perhaps you
But
could have
at the
focused-
start, yeah, you're right. Maybe I
That's
could have.
why might have made the task more difficult as well when they had to come up with their own sentence for the words. And you said, I don't know,
Yeah.
maybe.
I don't think there's anything else, like we've talked about meta language before. I don't think there's anything wrong necessarily with using it. It can be useful shorthand, but you need to be sure that your students know what you mean by a direct question and indirect question.
Right.
And often that means looking at examples of it in context first, seeing how it's used, seeing how it's put together, and then sticking a label on it at the end.
Right.
If your starting position is, right, everybody look at the direct questions,
Right.
and if they don't know that, they're going to go, what?
Well, that's why I didn't focus on it too much. I just said the direct way to say this question, to ask this question would be, and then I gave them the indirect equivalent. But it still wasn't very clear though.
I think the thing about the handout as well, I mean, that's fine. I think I don't have a problem with that as backup, but you still need to do a very thorough board stage where you look at where you take look at an example of a direct question and look at the syntax, the word order there, that it's verb, subject.
Yeah.
And then you have them look at examples up on the whiteboard, whole class, where they try and see for themselves from the examples you've got up there what's changed, what's different. Can they look at the examples you've given them and tell you what's happening
Well, I
and how
tried
things
to
are
get them
different?
to elicit them for a little while, and it didn't seem to be
Oh, yeah.
forthcoming.
That was one of the things that I wrote down, that you tried eliciting that, but then you sort of gave up because it wasn't working and turned to just explaining.
Yeah. I didn't really know what to do after that. I mean, I thought from where I was standing, and I've been reading about it, it was simple. And even to look at it, I can tell that the verb and the subject were changing places, and it was quite obvious. But obviously, if you don't speak the language, you're not going to necessarily pick that up straight away.
But you could have done it.
Well, they did, but only after I had to basically tell them.
I think it's because you said, "Can you see any difference in the structure?"
She said
Maybe I
word
should
order.
have
She
waited
It's
said
like
word
that, or a
order.
bit
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
it's quite an open question. Yeah,
And the word
Yeah.
structure as well.
Structure,
means,
yeah. I'd be a bit intimidated by that. Whereas you could have like highlighted or circled a couple of words and been like, what's happening here? Why have they moved? Maybe what part of language is that?
Mm.
Something like that.
No, I would agree with that.
I think it's also just a question of experience, Paul, as well, and
Yeah.
having the confidence to really slow down at that stage and
Yeah.
think, well, okay, they're not getting it, so I'm going to stick with this a bit
I don't
longer.
know. That was the stage of lesson I was most nervous about. So that could be a reason why I tried to go quite quickly through it, really.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
You did elicit the different. I think it was Curdo who said, when do we use if?
Yes,
Who told you when when we used if? But you had 5 questions up on the board, and one of the 5 direct questions, and it was how many, could you, what time, are you, and you know the difference there. You know that some of those are yes/no questions, and and some of them are open questions. But I'd go right back to that point and say, well, look at the 5 questions here. There are 2 different types, 2 different groups. Can you see what the difference is? See, if you get no response, we'll say, well, look at these 2. And give them the closed questions, the ones that ask for a yes/no response, and look at these 2. How are they different from the others? And really respond to the students really by breaking it down and taking it at their pace. If they can tell you straight off, oh well, look, those questions ask for yes or no answers, and they're much more open.
Yeah.
Then you can move things along a
Yeah.
bit, but it's about taking it slowly, systematically, I think, and having them look at examples of the language up there on the board that they can refer to. Anything else?
You could do a role play, maybe. I had the idea you could sort of put them in pairs and then print off pictures of like a tourist information centre or a box office or something, and they pick out a picture and then they create the scenario. They write down the sentences themselves, maybe. Just
What does that have that Paul's didn't.
Contextualises it
Mhm.
and makes it just a little bit more real, shows them what situation. I mean, even though they did understand that you should use it for being formal and polite, because you said, would you use this with your best friend? And they all said, no, you know, you'd use it to be polite or with people you don't know. So even though they understood, but maybe it would just make it a bit more real, maybe perhaps.
Yeah. No, you're right. It would have held their interest in the whole lot as well, probably.
A couple of other points then that I'm going to make briefly, which interestingly I think apply to your lesson as well, Sue. The context. You know, if you're ever going to do any language lesson, whether it's a function, whether it's a piece of grammar, whether it's a bit of vocab, starting point is what context? What's the context? Before you start saying, listen to this and finish the sentence for the indirect question, what do they really need? What do they need to know?
You expose them to the target language, like Paul did by saying, if I'm in a tourist office, what do I ask for? If I want to go and eat, you know, how do I ask them? Yeah, create interest, but then they don't know that that's the language that they're going to be learning about. And then it's a sort of just task thing.
That's a slightly different thing, isn't it? That was all part of building context, I suppose. But the context, the place where that language was to be found, in this case, was the tape. So they really need to understand. They really need to have an understanding of that context before you go on and say, right, write out the complete, listen to this and write out the complete indirect question. I'm not sure they did understand it as fully as they needed to. They predicted the kind of information that people would ask for. They listened once, twice to see if those things were mentioned, and then it was straight into finish this sentence. And I think I would have done a bit more comprehension work on the tape itself.
I thought that the demo would lead them more into what was asked of them for the task, because I can't remember the first line actually. It was, "Can you help me?" And she was asking, "I wonder if you could help me." And I thought doing that demo would get them into thinking that they're not going to hear specifically asking directly for the information.
Before you even start looking at direct or indirect questions, though, before you even consider that, with the group, they need to know exactly who's talking, who they're talking to, what they're asking for, just the specifics of that exchange.
All right, okay, I see.
Yeah? But let's have a look at Sue's comments. Do stamp for us again. All right, do you remember the sequence that you did it and how you did it? How
I
did you
folded
handle
my
it?
arms and they thought it was something
That's
to
why
do
they
with
thought it was something to do with your arm.
They said it's when you go to a disco and you get your hands stamped.
Okay, so there's lots of verbs, all connected with parts of the body, things you do with parts of the body. And some of them you can think, well, maybe they don't know. So you want to check a few. You want to do a brief feedback, but you don't want to do the whole lot because that's not the aim of your lesson. What you do is, right, everybody, let's just check one or two of these, and you say, what am I doing? Which one's this? And have them tell you. Remember how we talked about conveying meaning of vocab last week? If you start by giving them the word and saying, right, stamp, it's this, in a way, where do you go from there? But if you do the mime, if you convey the meaning and get the word from them, that's a real check of understanding. Other comments?
I thought your classroom management was good. You put them into groups, asked them to talk to partners, and pair checks. Because you knew their names as well, you could control them.
The model was very
model,
clear and
yeah.
natural, wasn't it? It was, and you did your best to get them to listen as well. Do a bit of learner training, I guess, with each new class that you teach, and they'll soon, once you've taught them a couple of times, they'll soon get the idea that no, they have to listen. You're going to model it a few times before them before they repeat. So that's the first time you'd really done that with the group, and it does take a bit of time to establish the pattern that you want.
Yes.
But I thought it was really nice. Okay, other feedback? Joe, Jan?
First of all, three things that struck me. I thought the handouts were very clear, very simple. I thought you had a very good rapport with the students, and that came over quite well. And that also ties in with your classroom management. I think you actually controlled them, but they actually responded quite well as well. And I like those, you introduced little bits of realia when you were trying to emphasise the point about she thinks the world of him, he thinks the world of her. And it's easier to explain reference to a picture than it is to actually explain it with just text.
Maybe just one thing you could have done a little bit more is just cover more of the concept and the meaning of a couple of the phrases in the concept check questions, so that they are like totally sure on like what each thing meant. Things like think the world of each other and like kiss your job goodbye and that. It's
I mean, that was a cardinal sin that I didn't demonstrate the form of those three. We have to add a pronoun.
because when you're asking them the questions, where you wanted them to adapt the sentence, they were just giving you the sentence.
Yeah,
So
that's exactly.
they were just saying they think the world of each other, and it's like I don't want you to say that. And they didn't quite, they just didn't quite get that you wanted them to change the language and use it rather than just repeat.
That's a big mistake.
Also the issue of appropriacy. Because we were talking about an example, where was it?
Kiss your job goodbye.
Kiss your job goodbye,
Yes.
that was it.
Yeah.
So if your boss gave you a letter to sack you, he
Yeah.
would say your contract's been
Yes.
terminated.
Yeah.
As opposed to you can kiss your job goodbye.
Yeah.
But in the context in which it wasn't a formal. That it was an
Yeah, no,
informal.
they
It
can't
was
do
fine,
Yeah.
yeah, of course, but maybe
But maybe you'd have to explain that in
Yes.
this situation it's an
Exactly,
informal.
outside.
It's a warning. Pull your socks up. In this case here, it would be,
Yeah.
it would be inappropriate.
So how can you
All the
check
other-
that? How can you check that aspect of the register, the formality aspect of its meaning? Turn your little scenario into a concept check. Right, TP next week. You've had a look at the unit?
Planning together is a very important part of the programme. This is where trainees learn to shape the lesson and negotiate with colleagues. The teacher-trainer steers and supports the trainees in this process.
Part of what you need to do is decide what's doable in an hour, what's practical for an hour.
In this case, trainees have chosen to follow a structured textbook, and this guides their planning. In other cases, the teacher-trainer provides a scheme of work for the trainees to follow. Trainees discuss which parts of the course book or other materials meet the needs of their learners.
We're missing out with David Copperfield because, I think it's just going to be too difficult for them, and also we don't really have enough time.
Well, hang on. There's a unit here, so there's potentially, a terms work if you want it to be really. There are masses of things.
Jan's doing like a grammar thing, so he's focusing on board statements and questions.
Okay.
So he's selecting parts from there to do. So he's not doing everything.
You're doing the vocab, which is what's the
And a bit of prompt.
The
birth, marriage, and death. That's
yeah.
nice.
And then reading for this.
After this initial discussion, the trainees will go away, work up their lesson plans and make any additional materials. Wherever possible, they discuss their lesson plans with each other before they teach the following week. At the start of the course, trainees receive scaffolded support, and as the course progresses, they become more and more independent.
So, what kind of lesson is it?
Skill.